story this way? Why are we sort of straining somehow to embrace so much more? I guess most of us in some way, that's our experience. We're all in some sense, we all in some ways feel ourselves sort of part of this urge to embrace a much bigger story, not to leave behind the point that we came from. And I sort of keep coming back to that, because it's one of the questions that's been coming up. We're not leaving things behind, we're expanding. Why are we doing that? And that's a massive question, and this is really just a very simple illustration that may or may not be helpful. You may or may not even agree with it. What I think, one of the dynamics, one of the things that's going on in the New Testament is the God of Israel, the one true created God who has lived in this small country on the perimeter of the Roman Empire, or of pagan empire, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, the Greek Empire, and so on. This small country, the God of that country is laying claim, in the first place, to pagan Europe. And this is what Paul's ministry represented, as he preached the gospel to Jews and to Gentiles, all the way from Jerusalem through Illyricum, which is the point he's got to when he writes Romans, looking back, on to Rome, on to the end, and on to Spain. That's his, and it symbolises, I think, for him, the fact that his God, who he believes is the one true God, is laying claim to that pagan world. It's not everything that we need to say about Paul, but I think it is an important narrative thread in the New Testament. And in a sense, Christian Europe, whatever we may think of it, is an outcome of that. It does embody, and I put church as empire in quotation marks. That's going to raise, because a lot of you are Anabaptists or covert Anabaptists or whatever. It's going to raise a lot of questions in your mind about the legitimacy of thinking in terms of Christian empire. But the fact is that Europe converted. And in some ways, I think, and I say take it or leave it, Europe, the conversion of Europe is an outcome, one of the outcomes of Paul's preaching. As we know, that empire, which is not just a sort of political, social empire, it's an intellectual empire in many ways, and that was modernity, modernism, after the whole rationalist Enlightenment thing. It collapsed. And, the church, us, and we're looking at this, I'm looking at this from a European perspective, but in many ways that models the experience of all of us, or the history, the story that we all share. The church has sort of been pushed to the margins, it's almost been expelled. We know that, that's part of the story that we're grappling with, it's part of what's driving the changes in our missional thinking. That we can no longer make all those big assumptions that the church used to make about being at the heart of things, about having the right to define existence for everyone. We don't anymore. Other narratives have come along, other powers have come along, and we have been expelled. We've been exiled. We're back on the margins, kicked out on the other side. Now, that raises all sorts of challenges for us, and we're still processing that. Our theology works very slowly. Our worldviews change very, very slowly. And I think all of us, many of the struggles that we have in making, doing church, in putting mission together, in understanding our relationship to the larger society, many of the questions that have come up as we've gone along have to do with the fact that we are wrestling with what it means to have been kicked out of the Christian West. And one of the things that we lost, I mentioned this early in the first session, one of the things that we lost was that sense of the wholeness of Christian being. Because when you're a Christian society, it's all taken for granted. That Christ is ultimately Lord over every aspect of human life. We've lost that perspective, and increasingly Christianity, the experience of church, became such a narrow, privatized, individualized thing. It's a part of the way we're reacting. It's part of a sort of defence mechanism in a way. We retreated to a place that secularism couldn't touch. A place where we were safe from the onslaught of secular culture, of secular thought. Well, there are good reasons for that. And we've adjusted our theology in many ways to account for that basis. It all becomes somewhat privatised. But as Leslie Newbigin has taught us, the gospel belongs in a public place. That's wrong to think that everything just can be done, can be carried out within the confines of our private spirituality or in the confines of the church. Somehow, the gospel has to be a public proclamation. So we are struggling in a way, and I'm trying to cover too many points in there, but in simple terms, we're struggling to recover the fullness of what it means to be God's people in mission. And it has a lot to do with this displacement. Yeah? No? You're very welcome to ask questions. Okay, I have no problems with that. You're welcome to interrupt. Any